we're going to crack open a kind of digital time capsule and take a look back at a personal collection of forgotten TV specials from the late 70s and early 80s. These were all captured on the legendary Betamax, so get ready for a trip back to a totally different world of television. I mean, just try to imagine this for a second. There's no streaming, no on-demand, no DVR, nothing. If you wanted to see something special, you had to be right there in front of the TV the moment it aired. That was it. This was the era of appointment television, where, whole families would gather for a big, once-a-year TV event. But then came a revolution, home recording. Suddenly, with a Betamax VCR, you could actually capture these moments that would have otherwise disappeared into thin air. You could build your own library, a personal archive of all your favorite specials, and watch them whenever you wanted. It was, and I'm not kidding, it was pure magic.
But before any of that, man, you had to be ready. You had to be a hunter. It was a constant race against the clock, a total battle with the TV guide, and you were always praying that your tape wouldn't run out right at the good part.
Well, let's start with a really cool category of specials. These were the ones that weren't afraid to get weird, to explore these unique fantasy worlds with, honestly, some surprisingly mature and artistic styles.
First up is a real hidden gem. It's a Halloween special that mixed rock music with, of all things, a deal with the devil's story. It was called The Devil and Daniel Mouse, and believe me, it was absolutely one of a kind.
And what's really interesting here is the story behind the special. It was made by the Canadian animation studio Nelvana, and it was basically a dry run for their cult classic animated movie Rock and Rule. And our source says that everything about it was just top-notch. The animation, the music, the story, the whole shebang, just lightning in a bottle. And hey, you don't have to just take my word for it. The author of our source material, Carlo DeSalvo, he puts it perfectly. He says it's, quote, just as good today as it was 40 years ago, if not better. That's the real sign of a classic, right? Okay, so moving on from rock and roll mice to a much more ethereal world, this next special brought a very, very specific artistic vision to the small screen. It was called Fairies, and its creative DNA runs deep into some of the most beloved fantasy movies of all time. So the key here is the artist, Brian Froud. And if that name is ringing a bell, well, it absolutely should. This is the guy who did the incredible concept art for Jim Henson's masterpieces, The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. This TV special was based on his book, and it brought that exact same beautiful and sometimes kind of creepy style to television. This next one is a brilliant example of how two different projects can come from the exact same book and just feel completely different. You had the hour-long special Gnomes, and then later the series, David the Gnome. But for our author, that original special just felt a little darker, a little more grown up. He said the series that came later felt a bit too preschool. It was that subtle shift in tone that made the special a definite keeper for the collection. All right, let's move on to the next big category. These are these specials that basically became rituals. The shows that popped up once a year and let you know that a holiday was right around the corner. And a perfect example of this is Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. I mean, this was a massive Saturday morning cartoon, but a few times a year it was a huge deal because the whole gang would get to graduate to primetime for a big holiday event. Now, in total, there were actually 5 of these primetime specials, but these 3 are the ones that made it onto the author's Betamax tapes. You had the Halloween and Christmas specials back in '77, and then a few years later in '82, the Easter special. For so many people, these shows became as much a part of the holiday as anything else.
And you got to admit, it was a pretty brilliant move by the networks. You take a cartoon that's already a massive hit on Saturday mornings, with a built-in audience of kids who love it, and you give it a bigger budget and a primetime stage for one night only. Let's take a look at a few of the shows that really perfected this strategy. Oh man, the Smurfs were the undisputed champs of the primetime special.
So on one hand, you had what they called the introductory specials. This was the budget-friendly approach, right? They'd take a few hit episodes, film some brand new little segments with Papa Smurf introducing the stories, and then they'd package the whole thing as a big, hour-long primetime event. It was basically a Trojan horse to get new viewers hooked and hopefully drive them to the main Saturday show. But that second strategy, that was the real investment. Totally new, original stories built from the ground up to feel like a big primetime spectacle. And just look at how many of these original specials they made. I mean, they covered every single major holiday, they created their own version of the Olympics, they even had a royal wedding special. This was not a one-off thing. This was a full-on campaign to make the Smurfs a year-round, primetime-worthy brand. They were turning a simple cartoon into an ongoing media event.
Back in 1982, Pac-Man got his own holiday special. The plot? Santa Claus crash lands in Pac-Land. It was a classic, fish out of water story for the Atari generation.
What's really interesting here is just how logical this all was. Even back then, I mean, Pac-Man wasn't just a game. He was pretty much the first real video game superstar. Everybody knew who he was. So a Saturday morning show, that was a total no-brainer. And from there, making that jump to a primetime special, well, that was just the next obvious step to see just how far that massive brand recognition could actually go. And this is just a brilliant example of the strategy. They took the world we all already knew, Pac-Land, the ghosts, the power pellets, and then they just dropped in a concept that everybody in primetime understands, a Christmas special.
Okay, now this next one is a really wild story. It's got this super weird production history that just goes to show how much experimenting was going on back then. Let's talk about Flash Gordon. So get this, the way this thing came to be is just nuts. It starts life as a made-for-TV movie. But then NBC decides, hey, let's actually chop this up and expand it into a Saturday morning cartoon series instead. So they do that. The series runs for a couple seasons, then it gets canceled, and only then do they finally put the original movie back together and air it in primetime like it was first meant to be. It just shows how unpredictable TV production could be.
And that right there, that's the magic we're talking about. Just imagine being a kid. Maybe you've got one of those tiny 9-inch TVs in your bedroom, and you're just flipping channels and you stumble across this epic, feature-length animated movie completely by accident. There were no social media alerts, no notifications. It was a genuine discovery, and that made it feel even more special.
But it wasn't always about the characters you already knew. Case in point, The Tiny Tree from 1975. This was just a sweet, one-off special with an awesome voice cast and a bunch of original songs. And get this, one of the songs was performed by the one and only Roberta Flack. I mean, that just shows you the kind of talent and production value these specials could pull in.
What's also cool is that these old tapes are like little time capsules of corporate history. So check this out. The Tiny Tree was what they called a sponsored special. It was funded entirely by one company, the Bell System. That meant every single commercial was for Bell. That kind of thing just vanished after their monopoly got broken up in the 80s. It's wild to see.
Oh, and here's another really charming holiday staple. This one was all about a curious little bear named Teddy Bear who decides, you know what, I'm not hibernating this year. I want to find out what this whole Christmas thing is about. And it had a pretty famous voice behind it, too. That's right, Ted E. Bear was voiced by none other than Tommy Smothers from the Smothers Brothers. It was, as the source puts it, just a very cute special. And here's a little piece of trivia for you. It actually had a Halloween sequel called The Great Bear Scare, but it was one of those elusive ones. Our author never managed to catch it on tape. It was the one that got away.
Sometimes, even the most dedicated collector can have their world turned upside down. See, for decades, our guy believed that one of his absolute favorites, a Halloween special called Witch's Night Out, which had the amazing Gilda Radner in it, was a totally unique, one-of-a-kind thing. But then, recently he made this stunning discovery. Witch's Night Out was actually a sequel. Turns out, the original was a special called The Gift of Winter, which aired 4 years earlier. It had the same production company, same characters, and yes, even Gilda Radner. Can you imagine? For a collector like him, finding a ghost in your own collection after 40 years, that's absolutely mind-blowing.
Strawberry Shortcake, she didn't start on TV. Nope. First, she was just a character on some greeting cards in the 70s. Then, that turned into a super popular toy line from Kenner, and only after all that success did they finally make the animated specials. It was a whole pipeline.
Okay, so now let's look at a slightly different kind of special. These weren't adapted from other shows, but from completely different kinds of media. We're talking about iconic songs and beloved books. I mean, come on, who doesn't know this song? The classic folk tune by Peter, Paul, and Mary is so iconic, it just feels like it was destined to be turned into an animated special. It just brought the story of Jackie Paper and his magical dragon to life in a whole new way. And get this, for the voice of Puff himself, they got an absolute legend, the great Burgess Meredith. The guy who played both the Penguin in Batman and Rocky's trainer, Mickey.
And the special did so well that it actually got a sequel with the wonderfully weird title, Puff the Magic Dragon in the Land of Living Lies. You gotta love that.
Okay, so picture this. You're a little kid, maybe 5 years old, and you record a TV special called Last of the Red Hot Dragons. It's about a dragon who survived Noah's flood. You watch that tape over and over and over. Then, years later, you just happen to catch another special on TV called Noah's Animals. It feels strangely familiar, but you just can't put your finger on why. So in your head, they're just two totally separate, unrelated cartoons.
So you've got what's basically the end of a story, and you've got the beginning of a story, but you've seen them years apart and completely out of order. There was this crucial piece of the puzzle just missing, the thing that tied it all together.
And here it is, the big reveal. It was actually a trilogy. Noah's Animals from 1976 was part 1. Last of the Red Hot Dragons from 1980 was part 3. And that missing piece, the special that connected them, was from 1977, and it was called King of Beasts. Unless you saw all 3 in order, how would you ever know they were connected? Now, this slide shows you exactly why it was so hard to spot. In the first special, the main villain is a crocodile. But by the third special, that same crocodile is a hero. And Noah, who's a huge character in part 1, is barely even mentioned in part 3. Without that middle special to show you the crocodile's change of heart, these two stories feel like they're from completely different universes. Oh man, the Berenstein Bears. For so many of us, they were the holidays on TV. Their specials were adapted from those books we all loved, and they had one for just about every big holiday: Christmas, Easter, Halloween. Seeing them on TV became part of the yearly tradition.
So, okay, we've looked at some pretty deep cuts, some real cold favorites. But what about a so-called special that became so huge, so ingrained in the culture, that a whole generation of people didn't even realize it started out as something else entirely?
This is all about a theatrical movie that just through the sheer power of television got completely redefined in everyone's minds as an annual broadcast event.
This is such a wild cultural shift when you stop and think about it. For years and years, CBS would broadcast The Wizard of Oz every single Thanksgiving. So for millions of kids growing up, it wasn't some old movie from 1939. Nope. It was the Thanksgiving special. It was just as much a part of the holiday tradition as the turkey and stuffing.
And of course, this whole tradition led to its own little Oz mini collection on our author's Betamax shelf. First, you got the original 1939 film recorded right off that yearly TV broadcast. Then there's the 1978 movie, The Wiz, also recorded from TV. And then, to top it all off, a totally separate half-hour animated special called Thanksgiving in the Land of Oz.
A movie that completely bombed in theaters could actually become a massive classic on television. The 1972 animated movie Journey Back to Oz. When it came out in theaters, it was a total box office flop. I mean, by all accounts, it should have just vanished into thin air. But then, something kind of amazing happened. The movie made its way to television. And on the small screen, it wasn't a flop at all. It became this beloved holiday special that millions of families watched year after year. And the way they did this was just brilliant. The studio, Filmation, they actually created 2 totally different versions of the broadcast to get as much airtime as possible. For the holidays, they filmed these new live-action scenes with Bill Cosby as the wizard, hosting from this Christmassy balloon. But for the rest of the year, they swapped those scenes out with new ones hosted by Milton Berle, with 0 holiday references. It was a genius marketing move.
And I mean, just look at this voice cast. You had Liza Minnelli playing the role her own mother, Judy Garland, made famous. Margaret Hamilton, the original Wicked Witch, came back to voice Aunt Em. You had absolute legends like Ethel Merman and Mel Blanc. This film was packed to the gills with talent, which just goes to show you its failure in theaters had nothing to do with its quality.
Okay, so for every amazing find and every surprise discovery, there's always that one story of loss, right? The one that got away. And that brings us to Section 5, a collector's dilemma, a high-stakes choice that, let's be honest, every single person with a VCR back then had to face at some point. And the setup is just, it's painfully simple. Picture this. It's one night in 1978. You've got 2 incredible animated specials airing on 2 different channels at the exact same time. And you've only got one Betamax recorder. What do? It's a nightmare scenario. So here was the conundrum of 1978. On one channel, you've got A Pink Christmas, a 30-minute special on ABC.
On the other, NBC has this hour-long Disney extravaganza, This Is Your Life, Donald Duck, both airing at the same time. His mom gave him some pretty logical advice. Record the Disney episode. It's longer. Better bang for your buck on the tape.
And it was logical, practical advice. It made perfect sense. So, as he says, I went with my mother's suggestion. He set the Betamax to record that hour-long Disney special. And here is the gut punch. The outcome? That Donald Duck special. It aired again and again and again over the years. He had dozens of chances to record it later. But that Pink Panther special, it just vanished. It was never seen again during his childhood. The rare gem was lost.
But a true collector never gives up, right? The hunt is never really over. So let's fast forward a few decades. We're in a new millennium now, and a new technology is about to bring this whole story full circle.
So, that painful night in 1978 wasn't the end of it. It turns out there were actually 2 more Pink Panther specials that came out later, and he missed those too. So for years and years, all 3 of them were just out of reach. And then, in the 2000s, something incredible happened. All 3 specials were finally released together on a single DVD collection.
I mean, just let that sink in. More than 20 years. That's a wait that spanned from the era of Betamax and rabbit ear antennas all the way to the age of DVDs and online shopping. It's an entire lifetime of waiting.
And when he finally bought that DVD, he said he felt a certain sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about nostalgia. The gap in his collection was finally filled. The one that got away was at long last home. The hunt was finally over.
This whole story is such a beautiful testament to passion, to patience. But it makes you wonder, in our world today, where pretty much everything is on demand, available instantly, have we lost something important? Have we lost the magic, the thrill, and that incredible feeling of fulfillment that comes from the hunt?
So when you look back at all of these tapes, everything from those fantastical mice all the way to the yellow brick road, what does it all really mean? I think it's about a lot more than just some old cartoons.
I think this quote from the source really just gets to the heart of it all. This simple but truly revolutionary idea of being able to watch something at my leisure. In a world where everything was a fleeting, one-time-only broadcast, the simple act of recording gave you control. It let you build your own little world, curated from the best stuff that TV had to offer. And all of this really just leaves us with one final thought. Whether it was actually on a Betamax tape or a VHS, or maybe it's just a really vivid memory. We all have those shows that kind of defined our childhoods. So what's the one forgotten special that's on your own personal tape?
You know that feeling when you're arguing with a friend about a movie scene and you're absolutely sure you remember it one way, but they remember it completely differently? Well, what if you're both kind of right? Today, we're going to dive into how the technology we use, whether it's an old Betamax tape or a streaming service, can actually shape our memories and create our own definitive version of a story, one that might not even be the original.
So this whole story kicks off with author Carlo Di Salvo and his absolute lifelong love for Superman. And we're not just talking comics here. For him, the character was basically set in stone by that incredible 1978 movie. But his first shot at actually seeing it on the big screen, yeah, that was, let's just say it was complicated.
Okay, so picture this. The year is 1978. We're at a shiny, brand new 6-screen cinema. And our hero, Carlo, is just 3 years old. And, believe it or not, he's about to face one of the first major decisions of his entire life. A real fork in the road, cinematically speaking.
And here's where the drama starts. His dad was so excited to see the new live-action Superman movie. I mean, this was a big deal for him. But our little 3-year-old hero? No. He only had eyes for one thing, the Disney re-release of Pinocchio. So, what happens? The family splits up. His grandma takes him to see Pinocchio, and his parents go off to see Superman. His only memory of the Man of Steel from that entire day is just this fuzzy, fleeting moment. He just remembers hearing that fantastic John Williams score and seeing a quick flash of red and blue against a dark sky. That's it. The whole big screen experience, totally missed it.
But here's the twist. What the movie theater couldn't give him, the technology sitting right in his living room was about to deliver, big time, just 4 years later. This is where that missed opportunity completely transforms into the definitive experience, all thanks to the magic of home video.
So in the late 70s and early 80s, TV had these huge, important miniseries like Roots and Shogun, and they were massive cultural moments for sure. But if you were a kid back then, those big historical dramas might not have even been on your radar. The real event, the thing that made you stop everything, was the arrival of a superhero.
Fast forward to 1982. Superman is finally making its big debut on network television. But this wasn't just ABC showing a movie. Oh no, they turned it into a massive, can't-miss two-night television event. And this broadcast, this was going to be his real first time seeing the film.
4 hours. Can you imagine? ABC stretched this thing out into a primetime spectacle. So how'd they do it? Well, they went back and edited in a whole bunch of scenes that were actually cut from the original version you saw in theaters. This wasn't just the movie anymore, it was like the movie plus plus. And man, they were masters of suspense. They get to that iconic moment, right? Clark rips his shirt open for the first time, Lois is falling from the Daily Planet building, and bam, ABC freezes the frame. Then you hear that deep announcer voice booming, "Tune in tomorrow for the exciting conclusion." It was this epic cliffhanger, or as Carlo calls it, a building hanger, that had every kid talking for the next 24 hours straight.
But beyond all the hype and the extra scenes, there was one thing that just lifted the whole experience into the stratosphere: the music. For the author, John Williams' incredible score wasn't just some background music, it was one of the best, most beloved parts of the whole thing.
And just think about how incredible that score had to be. We're talking about John Williams here, the guy who gave us the legendary themes for Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And yet, for this author, the music for Superman was #1. It was better than both of them. That just tells you how powerful and absolutely perfect that soaring score really is.
And here's the most important part of the story. The family recorded both nights on their Betamax VCR. So now they had these two separate tapes that held this totally unique, extended version of the movie. This was a game changer. It wasn't just about watching a movie anymore. This was about owning it. It became this personal treasure he could watch whenever he wanted.
This quote just nails the whole experience, doesn't it? That ability to record something and watch it again and again, it created this deep, personal connection. That worn-out Betamax tape wasn't just a recording. It was a portal you could open anytime you wanted. It completely changed how we experienced our favorite movies.
So, years pass. The old Betamax gets retired for a newfangled VHS player. He goes down to the video store, rents Superman, and pops it in, totally excited to relive the magic. But as he's watching, something feels wrong. The movie seems shorter? Scenes he knew by heart, scenes he could quote word for word, were just not there. And this kicks off the central mystery of his entire childhood movie-watching career. Why was his version, the one he'd so carefully recorded off the TV, so radically different from the official tape you could rent at the store? Where in the world did all those extra scenes go? It turns out there were whole subplots that were just gone. For instance, in the TV version, that little girl who sees teenage Clark racing a train, that's revealed to be a young Lois Lane. And get this, Lex Luthor has these weird growling pets in a pit that he calls the babies, and he actually tries to feed Miss Tessmacher to them. I mean, these aren't just little trims, these are huge parts of the story.
But the one that really got him was this one awesome action sequence. Before Superman can get to Lex Luthor's lair, he has to go through this whole gauntlet of traps. Bullets, freezing blasts, heat rays, the whole shebang. For a kid watching at home, this scene was one of the coolest parts. It made the movie feel so much bigger, so much more, well, super. And yet, poof, it was gone from the official version.
So this whole mystery of the lost Superman scenes really just drives home how one piece of tech, that trusty old Betamax, totally shaped his memory of the film. But now let's switch gears. His experience with another 80s giant, Star Wars, tells a completely different side of this story, all because of a whole different set of technological quirks.
See, unlike that one single definitive viewing of Superman, his experience with Star Wars was all chopped up. First, he saw it in a theater, but they got there late and missed the beginning. Then he finally watched the whole thing from start to finish at a friend's house on this brand new futuristic thing called a Laserdisc. It wasn't until a whole year later that he could finally record it off TV and have his very own Betamax copy.
Now, Laserdisc looked and sounded incredible. I mean, it felt like you were living in the future. But for Carlo, it had one major fatal flaw. You couldn't record on it. And that ability to just hit record during a TV broadcast and build your own personal library, that was everything. Betamax might not have been as fancy, but it gave you the power. It put you in control.
Okay, to really get this, you have to picture the mid-'80s. This was the absolute golden age of home taping. And our guide on this trip was a serious movie buff. This right here, this is a look at his prized Betamax collection, every single one recorded commercial-free right off of cable. And look at this list. We're talking absolute classics, Raiders, Star Trek, and of course, the crown jewels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. This wasn't just a hobby, you know. This was a curated art form.
So just imagine you're that kid. You've got that tape collection, you are completely obsessed with Star Wars. And then you hear it, an announcement for a brand new live-action story. I'm not talking about a cartoon or some toy commercial, a real, actual movie set in that galaxy far, far away, and it's premiering right on your TV.
And this is what was promised, the Ewok Adventure. It was a made-for-TV movie all about the furry little guys from Endor that we just met in Return of the Jedi. Now, you might also know it by its other name, Caravan of Courage. The whole idea was to expand the universe, tell a story from a totally different perspective. Sounds cool, right?
Well, here's where our story takes a little turn. Even though he was this huge fan, the commercials for the movie just gave him pause. Something felt a little off. So he made a decision that in the world of 80s home video was a really big deal. He decided he would watch it, but he was not going to give it the high honor of a spot on one of his precious Betamax tapes.
So, premiere night comes. He sits down to watch, and it turns out his gut feeling was more than justified. The reality of this movie was, to put it nicely, pretty underwhelming.
Okay, just look at this slide. This shows you the massive disconnect we're talking about. On one side, you've got Return of the Jedi. Luke, Han, Leia, the entire galactic empire, these epic space battles, the Force itself. Then, look at the other side. The Ewok Adventure. Instead of our heroes, we get a lost human family. Instead of the Empire, there's just a big monster. And maybe the most important part? No Jedi, no space battles, no Force. It was missing basically everything that makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars.
The only single thread connecting this movie to the whole saga was Wicket the Ewok. And even though it was the same amazing actor, Warwick Davis, in the suit, the connection just felt so weak, almost like it didn't even count.
And wow, this quote from the author just absolutely nails the problem. Think about it. If you take away the spaceship crash right at the beginning, this isn't a Star Wars story at all. It's just a generic fantasy plot that you could find anywhere. It felt completely cut off from the epic struggle and the unique vibe of the universe it was supposed to be a part of.
So what's the result of that kind of profound disappointment? It's pretty simple, actually. The movie aired, it was watched, and then, poof, it was promptly forgotten. It just didn't leave any kind of lasting impression.
But here's the real kicker. The story doesn't end there, because believe it or not, a sequel, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, was broadcast just 1 year later. But our author, and probably a lot of other people, was so checked out after the first movie that he completely ignored any commercials for it. He literally had no idea it even existed.
So for decades, literally decades, as far as he knew, the official count of these made-for-TV Ewok specials was one. Just one single, forgettable experience. But the reality was, there were two. The fact that an entire sequel could just come and go without a dedicated fan even noticing, that tells you everything you need to know about the impact, or, the lack of impact of the original.
So where do these movies fit in today? I mean, they're not hated like some other parts of the franchise's history. They haven't become some kind of kitschy cult classic either. They've just sort of faded away, becoming this weird little footnote that still surprises even some of the most hardcore fans.
And that brings the whole story full circle. It wasn't until he was an adult that he found out the truth, that this forgotten TV movie he saw as a kid actually had a sequel that he'd completely, totally missed. Can you imagine that realization? It's just bizarre, and it confirms just how deep these movies had been buried in his memory.
Look, the Ewok movies were, without a doubt, a misstep. They just failed to capture that Star Wars magic, and they were forgotten pretty quickly. But their weird little legacy leaves us with a really fascinating question. For a massive franchise, what's actually better in the long run? A creative risk that totally fails and just fades away? Or playing it so safe that you never even try anything new at all?
And the contrast with today is just, it's stark. Back then, every single recording was a deliberate choice. limited by physical space and tape. It was a shared thing defined by scarcity. And today, well, we live in a world of personalized abundance, an endless, fleeting feed where we almost never have to choose at all.
And that's what it all comes down to. Every single tape in that collection meant something. It was a physical artifact. It represented a commitment of time, of resources, of your attention. It was a piece of your personal history that you could actually hold in your hand. Which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In an age where you can watch almost anything, at any time, anywhere, what becomes special enough to actually save? What moments today are so important that you'd be willing to tape over something else just to keep them? All right, we are talking about V, the sci-fi miniseries about those seemingly friendly alien visitors. But underneath all the laser blasts and that amazing lizard makeup, there's this powerful hidden message that feels more relevant today than ever before. And look, this isn't just us looking back with modern eyes. Our whole explainer is based on the work of author Carlo DeSalvo, who remembers watching the show as a kid. And as you can see from this quote, even at just 8 years old, he had a sense that something much, much deeper was going on, a kind of allegory that would only get clearer as time went on. Okay, so try to picture this. It's 1983. There's no Netflix, no binge watching. When a huge network like NBC starts hyping up a special 2-night event like V with tons of commercials and magazine ads, well, that becomes must-see TV. And for millions of people, it was an absolute phenomenon. You just had to be there. For a kid watching back in the 80s, this show was pure sci-fi gold. The lizard makeup, incredible for the time. The special effects were just so cool, and you had these classic, unforgettable heroes and villains. I mean, how clever was the double meaning of V? It stood for the alien visitors, but it also became the Resistance's symbol for victory. And the characters, wow. Yeah, the hero Donovan, the totally menacing Diana, and then there was the kind-hearted visitor Willie, who, and you're not going to believe this, was played by Robert Englund, the same guy who would later become Freddy Krueger. Wild, right? In 1983, they unleashed a sci-fi phenomenon that grabbed the entire country's attention. The inspiration, it didn't come from some sci-fi pulp magazine. It came from history. The show's creator, Kenneth Johnson, was directly inspired by this 1930s novel called It Can't Happen Here, which is all about how fascism could rise right here in America. He wanted to take that core idea and bring it to a modern TV audience. So Johnson's first pitch was for a straight-up political drama about American fascism. But the network executives, they worried it was, and I'm quoting here, too cerebral for most people. So someone made a suggestion. What if the fascism came in disguise? What if it came from outer space, in the form of aliens? And just like that, a sci-fi Trojan horse was built and a TV classic was born. But here's a fun little detail. Kenneth Johnson was not happy about the sci-fi angle at first. Not at all. I mean, after creating shows like The Bionic Woman and The Incredible Hulk, he was really worried he'd get typecast as just that sci-fi guy. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized what a powerful tool the aliens could be for telling the exact story he wanted to tell all along. V was simply everywhere. It was a huge 2-night event, massive cast, characters like Mike Donovan, and our author was completely hooked, just like everyone else. But he made a critical error in the age of Betamax. He watched the whole thing live, but completely forgot to hit the record button. Ouch. The first miniseries was such a smash hit that NBC didn't waste any time. They immediately ordered a sequel for the next year. This was awesome news for fans, of course, but for our author, it was something more. It was a second chance. A chance to finally capture the magic on tape. And the sequel, V, The Final Battle, was even bigger. It went from 2 nights to 3. But there were also some big changes behind the scenes. The original creator actually left the project, and a new, absolutely iconic character was introduced, the cynical, wisecracking mercenary Ham Tyler. And that new character, he was a total game changer. The author says he loved the sequel even more than the original, and a huge part of that was Ham Tyler, played by the amazing Michael Ironside. This time, he didn't make the same mistake. He recorded all 3 nights, saving what he thought was an even better version of the story. So, with 2 incredibly successful miniseries under their belt, the next move for NBC seemed pretty obvious, right? Why keep this as a special event when you can make it a weekly habit?
The decision was made to turn V into a full-fledged weekly series. And just look at how fast this all went down. The first miniseries is in 1983. The sequel airs in May of '84, and by October of that very same year, V the series is on the air. That kind of lightning-fast turnaround, well, it turned out to be a massive challenge. The reality of TV before streaming and on-demand hit pretty hard. The series was on Friday nights, and our author was often out. He managed to set the Betamax timer for a couple of episodes, but most of them, he just missed them. And it seems like a lot of other people did too, because the ratings started to slide. So years later, when he finally caught the full series on the Sci-Fi Channel, a big question popped into his head. The miniseries was famous for its huge, sprawling cast of characters. So why, in the weekly series, did it feel like that cast was getting smaller and smaller every single week? He came up with a few possible reasons. Was it just budget cuts? I mean, a weekly sci-fi show is expensive. Or maybe the actors themselves weren't happy with the show's direction and wanted out. Or was it just bad planning? It was probably a little bit of everything, which just shows you how hard it is to keep an epic story going on a weekly schedule. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. It's not about the official story the network tells, it's about the personal story, the one that you curate yourself on a shelf full of Betamax tapes. A couple of years later, a local station reran the first V miniseries. He recorded it, and finally, after all that time, his personal Betamax collection of the story was at last complete. See, here's the most important part. What complete actually meant back then. It wasn't about owning every single second the network ever made. For him, the complete story of V was the 2 original miniseries. Those tapes held the definitive version. The few episodes he had of the weekly show were just bonus material. Kind of cool, but not essential to the main event. Which all leads to one last question for you. Today, we live in a world where streaming gives us everything. Every episode, every spin-off, every deleted scene. But in gaining all that, have we lost the art of curating our own complete stories? When everything is available all the time, what does it truly mean for a story to feel finished?
The age of Betamax. We're going to look at how this clunky, amazing technology basically let kids in the 70s and 80s become their own TV programmers, building the world's first personal media libraries, one tape at a time.
See, this wasn't just about grabbing Saturday morning cartoons. A lot of us were already recording those kids' specials, right? But this was the next level. This was about capturing full-length theatrical films and those classic made-for-TV movies. This was the real beginning of your own personal, curated movie collection.
So first up, beyond the weekly special. Now that we've set the stage, let's really dig into how this whole thing evolved. It went from just taping kids' shows to something much bigger, archiving entire movies. Your VCR wasn't just for cartoons anymore. It was your own private movie theater.
It is so hard to really wrap your head around this today, but TV used to be a one-shot deal. A movie would air, say, Tuesday night at 8, and if you missed it, that was it. Poof, gone. You might never get another chance to see it. But the Betamax machine, oh, that was a game changer. It gave you this incredible power to just reach out, grab that broadcast out of the air, and make it yours forever.
Okay, on to our next section, capturing fleeting favorites. Here's the thing though, just because you had the power to record something didn't mean it was easy. Not at all. Actually succeeding was a whole different story, which leads us to this high-stakes game of trying to capture these one-time only TV events.
And this right here, this timeline, it just perfectly captures the feeling of the time, the wins and the losses. Take the Gilligan's Island reunion movies. The first one, Rescue from Gilligan's Island, nailed it. A successful recording, a prized possession on the shelf. But the sequel, a total missed opportunity. Watched it, loved it, but never hit record. And that third one, with the Harlem Globetrotters, it's like a ghost, a faint memory of a broadcast that was never taped and just lost to time.
Which brings us to another huge piece of these Betamax libraries, the whole phenomenon of the made-for-TV movie, and, of course, the unlikely stars that came with them. I mean, come on, after Different Strokes made him a superstar, Gary Coleman was basically the king of the TV movie. He was his own brand, and his specials were appointment television. You didn't just stumble upon a Gary Coleman movie, you planned to record it. It was a deliberate choice, you know. You were capturing a little piece of pop culture history, whether it was The Kid with the Broken Halo or a really special one, The Fantastic World of DC Collins.
And oh man,
This one was a real keeper. The plot's a classic. A kid with a wild imagination accidentally gets into real spy trouble. But the best parts were these incredible daydream sequences where he's parodying huge movies like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And get this, it also had a super young Jason Bateman doing an English accent of all things. For a kid with a Betamax, this wasn't just a movie, it was like a treasure chest you could open up and explore over and over again.
But you know, if there's one story that truly captures the spirit of this analog era curation, it's got to be this one. A quest that took years, trying to piece together the entire animated Tolkien saga, one tape at a time.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. No internet, no IMDb, no Wikipedia, no streaming service that just hands you the whole collection. How in the world would you even figure out that a complete story exists, let alone track down all the different parts? This wasn't just watching movies, it was a real-life adventure.
And get this, here's one of the wildest pop culture connections from back then. The company Rankin Bass, the guys famous for all those cheerful Christmas specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, yeah, they were also the ones who brought J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasies to TV. So the author's whole journey into Middle-earth started with this botched recording of The Return of the King. He missed the first 2 minutes and the last 5. But it didn't even matter. He was totally captivated watching this broken tape over and over and over again, without even realizing it was the final part of a much bigger story. So the point is, discovering this world was anything but a straight line. I mean, look at this bath. It was all accidental recordings, tips from friends at school, a lucky find at the video store, and only then, after all that, did he finally read the books. Every single piece of that puzzle felt like a huge discovery.
Can you even imagine that feeling today? That pure, unfiltered shock and absolute joy of finding out there was more of a story you already adored? Gobsmacked is the perfect word. In our world of instant everything, that specific feeling of discovery, the kind that only comes after a really long search, that's something we've kind of lost, haven't we?
So what does this all add up to? Let's take a second to talk about the unique charm of these analog copies, these personal archives that were anything but perfect.
When you put the two eras side by side, the difference is just staggering. The Betamax era was all about imperfection, the fuzzy picture, the commercials you forgot to pause for, but it was also about happy accidents and that incredible thrill of the hunt. All that work made it feel like yours. Today, everything's perfect, pristine, and an algorithm just serves it up. The hunt has been replaced by the endless scroll.
And that's really the point. The story was so powerful, so mesmerizing, that even a fragmented, broken version of it was enough to create a lifelong fan. The imperfections didn't ruin the experience at all. In a weird way, they made the discovery even more special.
And we really have to remember the cultural weight these tapes had.
The author gets it. He totally acknowledges that if you compare them to the massive Peter Jackson movies, these old animated versions with their weird songs and funky art style might make some modern fans cringe. They're definitely a product of their time. But here's the thing you have to understand. For an entire generation of kids, this was The Lord of the Rings. This was how they first experienced Middle-earth. And that personal history, that feeling of discovery, it creates a kind of love that no amount of technical perfection can ever replace. And that's really the heart of it. The things that people might criticize today, the animation, the weird pacing, the parts of the story they skipped, for those who grew up with it, those aren't flaws. They're part of the charm. They're what make it special.
And that's really the final takeaway, isn't it? These movies hold such a special place for people. They've got this unique charm, a style that's all their own. And having them on a Betamax tape, commercials and all, made them feel like a treasure you had to work to uncover.
So as we wrap this up, it kind of leaves us with a question for you to think about. What's that movie or that show or that video game from your childhood that you just absolutely adore, not in spite of its flaws, but maybe, just maybe, because of them? What's on your personal Betamax tape? We're diving into the age of Betamax. This was a time when catching your favorite show meant you had to have a blank tape ready to go and hit record at the perfect moment. And the Betamax was the tool that made it all happen. I mean, for the very first time, you could literally snatch a TV show right out of the live broadcast and make it a permanent part of your home library. This was a complete revolution in how we watched, well, everything.
This timeline here gives you a pretty good idea of what counted as event television. When Elvis Presley died in 1977, those tribute specials became absolute must-record moments. Same thing for epic miniseries like The Godfather Saga, which NBC actually re-edited into this massive multi-night TV event. These weren't just shows, they felt like cultural artifacts you had to preserve. Yeah, but here's the catch. This newfound magic was limited by a very physical, very finite thing, the blank tape. And that scarcity, that's where our story really kicks off, with a moment of just pure, unfiltered childhood panic. You see, that VCR wasn't just for one person. Oh no, it was a shared family appliance, which basically meant you were in this constant, low-key battle for recording time and, more importantly, for those precious, precious few blank tapes. So just picture this. You're a kid, and a prime-time Scooby-Doo special, a full-on movie, just pops up out of nowhere. This is a huge deal. You raced over to the Betamax, your heart is pounding, you're ready to capture this thing for all time, and then you see it. The one thing you feared most. You are completely out of blank tapes, and the special has already started. What do you do? Well, you do what any desperate kid would do. You make a rash decision. In a moment of pure panic desperation, you grab the first tape you see. A tape that just so happens to have your mother's cherished recording of the Elvis Presley movie Viva Las Vegas. And you hit record. The fallout from this was, well, it wasn't great. When his mom found out, she wasn't just angry, she was genuinely baffled. From her point of view, he hadn't just erased her movie, he'd erased a movie that he himself liked to watch. It just made no sense to her. And this right here, this is just a brilliant example of flawless kid logic. See, in his mind, he hadn't taped over the whole movie, just the beginning of it. He'd saved the good part, the big car race at the end. To him, it was a totally reasonable sacrifice. But these VCRs, they weren't just for cartoons and sparking family arguments. They became these personal time capsules for massive cultural events. You know, the kind of event TV that basically brought the entire country to a stop. Families would record stuff like The Godfather Saga. This was a special version of the first two movies, all re-edited into a chronological miniseries. Or something like The Winds of War, which was a colossal 7-night event. That meant 7 separate tapes and a very, very strict do-not-touch order from his mom. You weren't just taping a show, you were capturing a piece of history. And then, of course, there was the MASH finale. Look at that number. Watched by over 100 million people. It was the absolute definition of a shared cultural moment, and you can bet that families all over America made sure they preserved that 2.5-hour broadcast on a Betamax tape, probably sitting right next to a Super Bowl. Taping movies also completely changed how we experienced more serious, and sometimes, let's be honest, pretty terrifying films. And there's no better example of this than the animated classic Watership Down. Now, the author admits he was a pretty sensitive kid. Getting scared in a dark movie theater could be a lot. But watching a famously intense movie like Watership Down at home on a little TV, that created a whole different feeling. It wasn't just about being afraid. This analogy just nails it. The experience wasn't that helpless, stomach-dropping fear of being on a plane during bad turbulence. No, it was more like the controlled, exhilarating fear of a roller coaster. You're scared, for sure, but you're also thrilled, because deep down you know you're safe in your living room. Our narrator was also building his own, super personal collection. You could really think of it as the very first analog playlist, curated not by some algorithm, but by the very specific tastes of one kid and whatever happened to be on TV that night. And what a collection it was. I mean, just look at the sheer variety here. You've got made-for-TV reunion movies, you've got dark animated films, sci-fi epics. It is a perfect little time capsule of what a kid in the early 80s cared about, from Gary Coleman all the way to Captain Kirk. But here's what's so interesting. The versions you recorded back then were often totally unique. The Animal House he taped was the heavily edited for TV version.
But all these memories we're talking about, they were incredibly fragile. Not just in our minds, but in their actual physical form. They literally lived on a thin piece of magnetic tape that could just fail at any moment.
The movie Raggedy Ann and Andy is such a perfect, heartbreaking example of this. The author recorded it, but the Betamax tape was defective. Pretty soon it became completely unwatchable. And just like that, a piece of his childhood was basically erased,
just gone, reduced to this vague, fuzzy feeling. The physical decay of the tape led to the decay of the memory itself.
And this is really the other side of that coin, because sometimes the tape did survive. And rewatching something like Charlotte's Web decades later, well, it's not just about the movie anymore. As the author puts it, the experience can be overwhelming. You're not just sad for the characters on screen, you're kind of mourning a version of yourself, a time in your life that's gone forever.
So what does all this mean for us today, right? We live in an age where everything is perfectly preserved, and you can watch it instantly. It means our relationship with media has fundamentally changed, maybe forever.
Here's the key takeaway. Nostalgia isn't just about the thing you're watching. That old movie, it's like a trigger. It doesn't just unlock the memory of the film. It unlocks the memory of who you were, where you were, and how you felt at that exact moment in time. The movie hasn't changed, but you have. And it's in that gap between the person you were then and the person you are now, that's where the real magic, and sometimes the sadness of a rewatch really lives.
So I'll just leave you with a question to think about. What movie, or show, or even song from your past have you revisited only to realize that it wasn't the thing that had changed, it was you?
So, what does it all mean? When you put it all together, what are we really looking back on here? Let's try to sum up what made this time in television so, well, so special. Because at the end of the day, a special was more than just a show. It was an event. In a world with only a handful of channels and definitely no streaming, you had to be there. You watched it when it was on or you missed it. And then everyone talked about it at school or work the next day. It was a genuine shared experience that brought millions of us together, and that's something that feels almost impossible to find today.
Which really leaves us with one big question, right? In this age of on-demand everything where you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want, what is today's special? Is there even such a thing? Maybe it's the season finale of a massive streaming hit or a surprise album drop from a huge artist. It's a really interesting thing to think about. What, if anything, has replaced that unique communal magic of the primetime special?